People who are into fashion might say you are what you wear. I'm not too sure about that. The way I dress might express something of my character, but comfy t-shirts and jeans are not the core of who I am. It seems like a mistake to judge people on their outer appearance. But we kind of do that when it comes to worship, don't we? We argue over outer things, the clothing that we wrap our worship in. We can get into very heated discussions over whether our services should be planned or free, quiet or noisy, using songs or hymns. People can debate over the use of modern technology or what instruments we should play, or fall out over which prayer book to use. These are reasonable questions, but they're not the heart of worship. The Bible tells us that humans look on the outside, but God looks at the heart. And the theme of this course is to focus our attention on the true heart of worship, Jesus Christ. Jesus, we're told, wore a one-piece linen garment and probably some sandals, but dressing up in those kind of clothes is not what anyone means when they say they want to be more like Jesus. What we mean is we want to have his heart, his attitude, his way of being in the world. As John puts it in one of his letters, this is how we know we're in him. Whoever claims to live in him must live as Jesus did. This is what we're getting at when we ask the question, how would Jesus lead worship? The Gospels don't show Jesus dealing with band rehearsals, choosing songs, or negotiating with organists. We therefore have to take a step back and look at the larger picture of the character of Jesus. To work out how Jesus would lead worship, we need to know how Jesus lived. So Sarah and I read through one of the Gospels, Luke's Gospel, and we came up with 4 headings which we felt summed up Jesus' character and how it relates to our worship. Over the next few sessions, we'll be looking at how Jesus was a humble servant, a leader with authority, a creative communicator, and reliant on the Spirit. These headings are useful when we hold them in tension. Being a humble servant needs to be balanced with leading with authority. And being a creative communicator works best when we hold it in tension with being reliant on the Spirit. As we challenge you throughout this course, you'll probably notice how you've got imbalanced in some areas, tending towards one side of attention and needing to grow in the opposite side. We know that most of you who are following this course are doing this stuff in your spare time. Life is busy, and you probably already feel as if you're giving all you can to the worship team. We don't want to add extra burdens to you. Our passion is to share inspiration and ideas to help you grow into the fullness of how God has gifted and called you. So that's where we're heading, and we want to start by looking at Jesus being a humble servant.
It's pretty common today for a worship group to look quite a lot like a rock band on TV. There are the instruments, the microphones, perhaps even lights and a stage. The creativity and energy that can flow from this is really exciting. And sometimes stages and microphones are just practical solutions to being seen and heard. But the danger with this is that the worship leader and the musicians can start to feel like it's all about them, that their role is to draw the attention to themselves, their singing, their performance. We can misinterpret what it means to be a worship leader. That's a bit like when Jesus' disciples misinterpret the title Messiah. Peter first calls Jesus Messiah or Christ in Luke 9. But Jesus knew that they would misunderstand that word. They would imagine a dominating leader defeating the Romans with military and political power. Jesus says, no, that's not the kind of Messiah I will be. Instead, he explains that he will suffer, be rejected and killed. This Messiah will be the suffering servant, laying down his life for the world. And if that wasn't challenging enough, he then puts his focus back on the disciples themselves. Then he said to them all, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. Do the disciples understand what Jesus is getting at? Well, we only have to skip a few verses until we find the disciples arguing about who's the greatest among them. They still don't understand. So this time, Jesus employs a visual aid. He has them look at a humble child and declares that he who is least among you all, he is the greatest. Right up to the Last Supper, the disciples continued to miss the point of this teaching. We are told that even then they were found arguing about who was the greatest. Jesus has to challenge them again. The greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves. I am among you as one who serves. Part of following Jesus is about imitating his servant attitude. Think about how that applies to your experience of leading other people in worship. What would it look like to die to ourselves, our preferences, our egos, our selfish ambition? How can we approach leading worship like a little child, like a server in a restaurant, like the Messiah who got down on his hands and knees to wash his disciples' feet? It means living like the one who was in very nature God, but didn't grasp it. Instead made himself nothing and took on the form of a servant and was obedient to death, even death on a cross.
I think we need to care less about how, whether we're singing a cool new song and whether it's all flashy and the production values. I would just say, stop worrying about your screens and your PA and how good you look and how well it all sounds, and just think about whether it's actually honestly expressing where your people are to God.
This teaching challenges my approach to leading worship. Sometimes when I'm planning songs, I'll start thinking about what makes my voice or my guitar playing sound good. Or I pick only songs or styles of worship that I like. I can forget that there is a congregation I need to serve. What would it look like if I chose to serve, for example, the older people in my church, or the children, or those who are new to church, or those who have additional needs? Being a humble servant is also about how I relate to the rest of the service I'm part of. Do I take into account what the preacher is speaking about, the themes of the church year or the season, the elements which will be led by a service leader or other people? Or do I act as if I only care about the part that I'm leading? Imitating the humility of Jesus also challenges which events I will serve at. Of course, I will play at the big celebrations and the high-profile services, but what if I'm asked to lead for the toddler group, or the seniors worship hour, or the prayer meeting which just attracts 5 people? And it impacts my attitude towards other tasks in the church. I can be very happy to lead worship, but will I put out the chairs before the service, or pack away the PA system, or file the music? So, as you apply this to your own situation, what would developing Jesus' humility mean for the way you choose songs, how you work with other musicians and leaders, your attitudes towards marginal groups in the church, and the way you approach menial tasks and difficult services? Pause the video to reflect on or discuss these questions.
In the book of Romans, Paul challenges his readers. Do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. I don't think this means we should hate ourselves or ignore the gifts God has given us. It means recognizing the great and unique things God has placed in us, in the people around us, and acting with confident humility. In John 13, it says, Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he'd come from God and was returning to God. Jesus was so secure in who he was and where God was leading him that the very next thing John writes is this. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Jesus could take the place of a servant because he was totally secure in his identity in God. Confident in who we are in God, we too can be free to serve with humility. Let's bring this session to a close by praying together. Jesus, we are inspired by your example of humble service. Remind us of our true identity as daughters and sons of God, and give us the courage to serve our churches as we lead them in worship. Amen.